This was always unhealthy. And as a result, you feeling uncomfortable being in their presence again doesn't mean you haven't healed. It means you're wise. It means your mind and your body are getting it. And it becomes an alarm signal to say, I need to step away because I don't want to put myself in harm's way. You've learned to advocate for yourself. So let's talk about loneliness. Here's where it gets interesting. Because so many people don't fully understand narcissistic abuse, people experiencing it will often report feeling lonely because nobody quite understands what they're going through. Sometimes even therapists don't. But the loneliness may have started a long time ago while you were in the narcissistic relationship. So let's take a look at these two different kinds of lonelinesses that come from being in narcissistically abusive situations. Now, first, narcissistic abuse, as I said, is something that many people don't know about or talk about. While it's happening to you, many people may gaslight you and say, oh, relationships are tough. It sounds like you guys are going to figure it out. Or they may something like, oh, families need to stick together. Families always find a way forward. Over time, it's easy to feel that you cannot talk about what is happening to you. And if you do, you will feel silence, you might feel shamed, you might even be gaslighted. Now, obviously, if you are already isolated in your narcissistic relationship, and you are already living in that alternate universe in which you are never listened to, or never heard, or you simply have your reality denied on the daily, that's already lonely. But coupled with the world not getting it, it really feels lonely. For the duration of your narcissistic relationship, you may very well have been lonely. If this is an intimate relationship, there may have been some love bombing weeks or months or good moments interspersed in the relationship when you thought you were in something good. It gets more and more bracing and difficult to go from a good moment to then, boom, being devalued, discarded, and ignored. The cycle can feel unpredictable, and so you may never feel like you belong anywhere, which is a terribly lonely experience. If you are in a relationship with a neglectful narcissist in particular, then you have cornered the market on loneliness. It's a perverse form of solitary confinement. To be in a room where there is another person who does not acknowledge you, it's even worse than being alone. Listen, for those of you who are in your narcissistic relationship, because you're in a relationship, the world assumes you're not lonely. Anyone out there in a toxic relationship will tell you that being in a relationship with someone who does not offer empathy, or who does not hear or see you is far more lonely. That's far more lonely than simply being alone. But the world doesn't get it. And so the assumption is if you're in a relationship, you're all sorted out. So you're not lonely, which just can magnify that feeling of loneliness. And again, to my prior point, since narcissistic abuse is not well understood, it makes it even worse. Now, if we're talking about loneliness in your family of origin, you know how lonely narcissistic abuse was. Children are remarkable at justifying and rationalizing and blaming themselves, but many adults look back at their childhood in a narcissistic family system and reflect on the anxiety, the confusion, the helplessness, and the powerlessness of their childhoods. Listen, a child can't schedule a therapy session or even figure out what's happening. For some children, one day they may see what happens in other families and see those other families are different than theirs, happy, where people are being heard and respected, and where there's kindness. And that only substantiates that sense of loneliness, of knowing that their family is different. And for a child to feel different, especially in a negative way, is tragically quite lonely. It can be quite similar in the workplace, especially if everyone is not having the same experience. If you're experiencing narcissistic abuse in the workplace and other colleagues are having different experiences, narcissistic bosses love playing favorites and they love triangulating. It can be terribly isolating. It can be tiresome to be the person who complains about work all the time. But in tough economic times, you may not have another route you can take. You got to pay the rent, so you got to stay in the job. So then you have the loneliness of working in an invalidating place and not being able to see a way out. One of our past Surgeon Generals, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has called loneliness a public health crisis, and I agree, it is now more than ever. But the loneliness of narcissistic abuse is its whole other beast. It's a whole other form of loneliness. If you grew up in a narcissistic family, you know what it feels like to be surrounded by people and feel completely alone. If you are in a relationship with a narcissist, you know what it is like to be in the same room as someone and to not be seen. Loneliness, as part of narcissistic abuse, and even on its own, takes a toll on our mental health. But like I said, it's very much part and parcel of narcissistic abuse. Over time, that sense of loneliness may make you vulnerable to other patterns we often see in narcissistic abuse, such as isolation, which can also undercut your ability to seek out help or just create social support. So what do? First, you gotta create some form of social connection. Healthy friends, kind, respectful family if you got any, good colleagues, spiritual communities, social groups, community groups, any way you can connect. The loneliness of narcissistic abuse can make you feel like you are experiencing something that no one else can understand. And they may not. But other people, even if they don't fully get what you're going through, can be an antidote to loneliness. Secondly, please consider therapy with a person who gets this. Someone who understands narcissistic abuse is essential. And just the validation of what you're going through can start cracking at your shell of loneliness. Third, please consider support groups such as Facebook support groups or other moderated groups for people who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. It is important that you choose a moderated group because that can ensure more safe dialogue because they're careful to monitor who enters the group. Seeing that other people are enduring this experience of narcissistic abuse can help with the loneliness. These online forums may also turn you on to other resources such as support groups and other materials. Now, it's really lonely to endure a human experience that many other people may not understand, and loneliness is a pretty classical part of narcissistic abuse. Other people being in your life, other good, kind, empathic, warm people can help profoundly, even if it's just to understand and enjoy companionship again. Lots of times people will feel that going through narcissistic abuse, loneliness is simply because they don't even get to use that muscle anymore. It's like an atrophy of that social part of yourself. It's really, really important as you feel the loneliness of this experience. Again, some of it is just because you do feel so isolated and so full of shame. 2 other topics we'll be taking on in this series of narcissistic abuse, that you figure out the ways to address this, because loneliness is such a paralyzing part of narcissistic abuse. Part of the reason I make this YouTube channel is also to act as an antidote to this. I want there to be a community of people out there that get this, that see this, and listen. You can see from the comments that people are going through this. You're not alone in this, that we get this. We get what you're going through, and even if other people around you are clucking at you and saying, come on, you know what, you're part of a big world, you're part of a family, you're not alone. At those times, despite how lonely it feels, I want you to know that there is a community out here to help you understand this and to help you heal. This is a relatively standard pattern in most cases of narcissistic abuse, but it can come about through some very different pathways. The first is what can often be seen in a controlling, malignant, even coercive relationship. The narcissistic partner deliberately and systematically isolates you. This can start gradually. Early on, love bombing. I feel such an intense connection with you. I want to spend every waking minute with you. Or they text you, what are you doing? Who are you with? What are you about? FaceTime me from there. I want to see where you are. Or they might tell you, stop working. I can support us both. Or what are you wasting all this time on school for? Just spend more time with me. I got this. That friend of yours, she doesn't have your back. She says some really shady stuff. I don't like her. I don't trust her. I don't think she's a good friend for you. Your mother doesn't like me. You know what? I'm not going over to her house anymore. She disrespects me. I don't even like you spending that much time with her. What are you, a mama's girl? Why do we have to have people over again? Why can't it just be you and me? And then you slowly lift your head and you find that you've become pretty darn isolated. And in some cases, your comings and goings are being carefully monitored and restricted. The other path, it's different. It's a path that's really littered with shame. You may start to sense this relationship isn't always quite right. Maybe even some friends and family see it and you try to cover it up. Maybe your friends and family even start saying something. I don't really love how he treats you. But you aren't ready to let the relationship go for many reasons. Perhaps it's trauma bonding, perhaps because you're afraid of being alone, perhaps because you don't want to start dating again, perhaps it's the hope that it's someday going to get better, perhaps it's the guilt about leaving, or perhaps even guilt about even thinking anything bad about your partner. Maybe it's all of the above. But you do sometimes wish you had someone to talk to about this relationship because it's confusing. However, because you don't want to spill the beans and tell the truth about your partner and tell your friends or family how bad your partner's been, you don't say anything. And as a result, you may fall out of touch with all of these people because it's hard to see people you're close to and either not tell them the truth, or you might be afraid that you're going to let something slip. The shame of what this relationship has become can isolate you further and further. There is the fear of the pressure that people might put on you to leave, but there's also the concern that if you tell them bad things about your partner and the relationship does keep going or gets back together if you've broken up, that it will impact their view of him or her, your partner, or of you. And since you've been propping up this vision of your narcissist with your false narrative about them and the relationship, it can be scary to think that you would pull back the curtain and tell the truth and then have to face the shame of staying in the relationship with them, knowing all about how bad your narcissistic partner's behavior has been, that they now know it too. It can feel uncomfortable that they kind of know your truth. Then there's the third path of isolation, which is exhaustion. These relationships are really tiring. You keep trying. You keep the house clean. You try to get things perfect at work. You try to make enough money. You try to ensure the kids are clean and out of the way. A narcissistic partner, in essence, it's like having a really badly behaved child that you're not allowed to discipline. So just by dint of sheer exhaustion, you may get isolated because you haven't got time for anything or anyone else. People from narcissistic families really understand isolation. Sometimes your family itself is isolated, but it may also be that you didn't want to bring friends around when you were a child because of how your narcissistic parents or siblings or other family members behaved. Again, that's the shame. You may have felt you couldn't talk about your family or were just simply ashamed when you saw how loving families functioned and realized that wasn't how your family worked. Your family may have also isolated you as well with strict rules and control, or you got stuck having to manage your narcissistic parents' demands, leaving you little time to go and make friends. The sense of isolation when you are from a narcissistic family is a theme that can often dog you for your entire life. Isolation is a typical element of narcissistic abuse. I've rarely seen a relationship where it's not an issue, and it's quite bad for your mental health. At this point in history, we're living in the era of isolation, and it's taking a toll on all of us. But the isolation experiences that are a part of narcissistic abuse are a unique issue because it may be self-enforced, it may be narcissist enforced, your isolation. But even when you are amongst people, you may still feel isolated. The experience of a narcissistic relationship is something that not everyone understands. And more often than not, other people do gaslight you. People telling you things like, oh, it can't be that bad, or if it's that bad, why don't you just leave? Or maybe you guys just need a weekend away. Or if it's your family, people may say nonsense like, your mom or dad, they didn't really mean that. They don't mean to hurt you. Or they did the best they could. Or you shouldn't speak so badly about your family. It reflects badly on you. And all of this tribe gaslighting coalesces, and hopefully resources like this YouTube channel and other YouTube channels, books, support groups, and the other resources out there help you feel less alone. Millions out there are suffering with narcissistic abuse. I promise you, you do have a community. So what do you do about this isolation? Yeah. I'm going to say it. Number one, therapy. It's one of the first steps to addressing social isolation. If therapy is not accessible to you, please consider online support groups or group therapy, which may serve as no-cost or low-cost options. You need someone to bear witness to your pain to help you cut through this isolation. If you are being isolated by a partner and it's getting severe, please consider exploring domestic violence resources and agencies near you. You can look up information online, but it is very important that you don't look up these resources online if the device is on a shared network like the cloud, or it's shared iPads and phones where a partner could see it. Use a friend's phone or a work computer, but explore those resources carefully. You don't have to. Thirdly, I want you to remember, you don't have to talk about your relationship when you talk to friends. You can just give them a non-committal answer. Everything's fine with him, everything's fine with her, we're fine. But talk about them. Just check on them. Just the act of social contact could be helpful. Fourth, try and walk somewhere where you can be distanced, but at least you could see other people. Yeah, it can be loneliest when you're in a crowd, but if you can see other human faces, that can sometimes help. Number 5, find all of the narcissistic support resources you can. They're here. There are social media feeds on Facebook and Instagram. There are good communities springing up all the time. Here's what I ask from all of you. In the comment section of this video, if there are narcissistic abuse resources that have been useful, will you please put those links in the comment section? I want to help people get to those places so they don't feel isolated, and I want this to be a place where people know where they can go and get some of that support. Breaking out of isolation is the narcissist's fear. They don't want you to break out because, of course, it means you might leave or get other people to tell you that you might need to leave or give you support. Start small. Listen to alternate viewpoints. The more you can hear other points of view, the more you can be with other people, the more you can have other reality checks and touchstones, the less likely you are to be isolated. It is such a standard part because there's so much shame about being in these relationships, but you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're a human being. There is no instruction manual for this. I'm doing my best here to give you one, but you're figuring this out, and you don't need to figure this one out alone. So I do hope, like I said, resources like this and all the resources you guys are dropping in the comments section are going to give us some insights into places that have been useful for you. Anything, like I said, Instagram feeds that have been great, people of good Facebook pages, you name it. Let's get it all organized here. And those people who are doing great work about getting this information out, let's go over and take a look at what they've got so we can make this community bigger and bigger all the time. So I want some of you, if you feel comfortable, dropping a comment in about this. How many of you sometimes think back to the person you were before you got into your adult narcissistic relationship? Do any of you look back and say, I was this really confident person way back when? I was like interested in stuff and I did really well in school. I had this good job. I had lots of friends. And then I got into this relationship and I look back at that person and they're like a stranger to me. If that was you, drop it. Even if you said, yep, that was me in the comments. I think it's important for a lot of us to see that, because that's what we're going to take on today. We're going to take on this idea of this sort of, after you've come out of a narcissistic relationship, looking back and wondering what happened to that person before the relationship, because after this relationship, that person is shredded. So let's talk about this. I have had people say to me, I was so confident before this relationship happened to me. I would laugh loudly. I would enjoy life. I made eye contact with people and I smiled and I openly shared my opinion. I wasn't so jumpy and always on the edge of my seat. I knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted from life. I never had trouble ordering in restaurants. Now I go in the grocery store and I can't even figure out what kind of laundry detergent to buy. One of the worst legacies of narcissistic abuse, in my estimation, is that a person completely loses themselves in these relationships. And they may feel that the experience of going through this relationship can actually change them in ways that hold them back, even after they get out of the relationship, if they do. I remember very clearly once a woman telling me the story of how she loved to tell a joke, even like kind of like an off-color, funny, silly, dirty joke, I guess. She would love throwing parties. She would laugh loudly. She was so curious about the people around her. Decades in a narcissistic relationship of being criticized and being told her laughter was too loud and too rude, of being told she was stupid and intrusive for asking so many questions of other people, of having her cooking, and she was one heck of a cook, of having her cooking ridiculed. And after so many years of that narcissistic indoctrination, she stopped laughing. Not only loudly, she just stopped laughing. She stopped getting together with other people because her confidence had plummeted. And after years of having her cooking criticized, a hobby she absolutely loved and was really good at, she stopped having people over. This woman was once the brightest light in the room, but as long as she was in this marriage, and sadly, people, in this particular case, she's still in the marriage, her light got turned off. In her case, she is not and was not able to find a way out of this particular marriage. And so for her, turning off her spark was safer and easier than being belittled, diminished, gaslighted, and mistreated on a daily basis. She sadly, and really tragically, learned to fade into the background, and to never get her light turned back on, and lives her life in relative isolation with her abuser. This story, I tell you, has been reproduced thousands of times. People who start making so many little micro changes to stay in the narcissistic relationship, to avoid the narcissist rage, whether it's turning down their laughter, becoming more isolated, no longer discussing their dreams or their hopes, no longer adequately taking care of themselves physically, not even getting haircuts or anything on a regular basis, no longer sharing their emotions. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen all of a sudden. It happens gradually, and it really is death by 1,000 cuts. Now, it's far, far worse if this is how you grew up with a narcissistic parent. One pattern I've observed is that there are people who were born, they were temperamentally, naturally exuberant, or there are people out there who are born naturally a little bit reticent, or people who are born naturally vulnerable, and their family silences them, or mocks them, or shames them, or devalues them. Their families of origin, their parents, even their siblings, devalue them for who they are. To grow up with a narcissistic parent or parents or other family members it's typically, frankly, is to have to deny your true and authentic self. Many people who grow up like this will say that when they would feel sort of safe, maybe with friends or say family or something like that, their true self would come out. But by and large, when they're home with their family, they would feel censored. They can hear their unkind parents' voices in their head when they finally are just being their true selves, and that's one safe moment. Of course, there's kids from these kinds of families who rebel and walk away from these families, and frankly, I gotta wonder if they're not the ones who often fare the best, because they often set themselves free from these family systems. But there's also a lifelong grief for people who feel that they have to go no contact and walk away from a family because they feel like they no longer have a family. And those who get stuck and don't ever leave the narcissistic family, but get stuck in the cycle of the narcissistic family and never separate, will sometimes never let their true selves out so the world can see their authentic selves. And to me, then I think we're all robbed because we don't get to see those people wholly. So this becomes important to consider from a perspective of healing. If you actually are able to get out of an adult narcissistic relationship or relationships, whether that's a marriage or a fiance or boyfriend or whatever, girlfriend, you may have gone gray rock, you may have gone no contact, you may have set up big boundaries, but now you're more free of that relationship. You may actually find your true self starting to pop out again. After a few months even, that loud laugh of yours may spontaneously pop out. You're like, they're not here. I can laugh loudly. You may quickly close your mouth for laughing loudly, waiting for the narcissist to yell at you even though they're not there, waiting for the narcissist to publicly shame you even though they're out of your life. And you sort of still get that, I laugh too loudly. And you recognize that you still feel their dark shadow peering at you. Over time, you start adjusting. Next time the laugh kind of comes out at you, that's okay. You don't try to hide it. You figure out the dishes can stay in the sink a little bit longer. You can talk about your aspirations amongst your friends or a dream goal you have. Simply put, once the narcissist is gone, you can be you. Healing is interesting because it does take a while. It doesn't happen overnight. For those of you coming out of these relationships, you're going to find that you censor yourself for a long time. You will keep hearing the narcissist's warnings and mockery and criticisms. You'll hear old parental voices. You'll hear the voices of ex-partners. These are the echoes from the past, always telling you that you are wrong, you are bad, you're stupid, you're not enough, you're overreaching, or you just need to keep your mouth shut. Or maybe they're telling you you're an attention seeker, or on and whatever criticisms they come up with. And many of those damn accusations you got from those narcissists over the years were projections, by the way. The narcissist was calling you out on their own shit. Always pay attention to that projection stuff. It tells you a lot about the narcissist. Now here's the thing. These narcissistic relationships change us. They change us in powerful, profound, and tragic ways. I'm not going to sit here like Sister Sunshine and tell you that you're just going to go back to your optimistic, uncensored, loudly laughing, ha 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 version of yourself. If you even got a chance to be your true self, because that might have been taken away from you by your parents. You won't go back to some sunshiny, unicorny version of yourself. Narcissistic relationships are a loss of innocence. You may still hold back on that loud laugh of yours for a while. You may still be really anxious if the chicken you cooked for dinner was too dry. You may wonder if you're ignorant and your opinions are foolish, or your dreams are ridiculous, or your emotions are invalid. You will hold back a little. That's what survivors do. They gaslight themselves. And then, as things feel more safe, you will slowly come out of your shell. It will be tentative. and you will smile and think inwardly, I'm okay. I laughed a little bit loud, and it was okay. And you know what? Because that laugh is coming from that deep place we laugh inside, it'll happen again. But this time, you'll also be wiser. You'll be more discerning. You will learn your audience. You will hold out for people who feel safe. You will have an internal, steely sense of strength that comes from surviving these relationships and psychologically living to tell about it. Of knowing the difference between empathy and mimicry. Of knowing when you're being gaslighted as it's happening, rather than recognizing it a couple of days later. You'll learn the power of stepping out of a conversation in which you are being disrespected and invalidated instead of just sitting there and giving that conversation permission. You'll hopefully no longer feel the need to call them out or over-engage with an antagonistic, entitled person, but instead start to learn to use your silence as your strength. Start celebrating your boundaries and exiting, not because you're scared, not because you're shy, but because you respect yourself, and you will commit to no longer giving the best of yourself to someone who consistently tries to dim your light. Here's the deal about life. We can never go backwards, but we can go back one last time and rescue our authentic selves. We can infuse that authentic self with the wisdom of having survived. And yeah, a part of all of us will always be just a little bit jumpy because of these wounds. And you know what? That's okay. Because that little bit of jumpiness is your authentic self saying, it's okay. I got through. These are my battle scars. And I am not putting myself in the line of fire ever again. So I want you to think about it that way. You're running into a burning building and you're going in there to pull your authentic self out, bring it out, take good care of it, and share it with the world. But let's talk about this, because some of you are thinking, Dr. Ramani, the only thing I want to do is heal from this narcissistic relationship. And my single mission is that everyone heals from these relationships. So how could there possibly be a dark side to healing from narcissistic abuse? So think about it. Healing from a narcissistic relationship is a really, really difficult process. It takes time. It often takes therapy and support and hard work and leaving behind old demons, and it's a lot of work. And especially if it relates to family of origin issues, it really does often require therapy or other kinds of supports, but it's a lot. So you're thinking, I've healed. This is exactly what I'm striving for. How could that be difficult? When you heal from narcissistic abuse, something opens up in you. Perhaps the ideas of possibilities you had for yourself long before the relationship ever happened, or a new belief in yourself, or an ability to see yourself as enough, or a much healthier view of the world. It can really, really bring you into a new space where you're seeing the world clearly, and the world is seeing you clearly. It's as though you were looking through a dirty window, and now the dirty window is clean. You're like, oh, wow. There's this whole big bright world out there, and I can see it clearly, and I'm not putting up with poor relationships. I'm not putting up with bad treatment in my relationships. Like, I'm good. So now you're more healed, and you're healthy, and you advocate for yourself. Well, here's where things can get tricky. Many, many people I've talked with have talked about this happening, is that once you heal from a narcissistic relationship, you feel strong enough to talk to the narcissist again, which in the macro actually could be kind of good. Like, okay, why? I mean, I think that the less negative energy we carry through the world, the better it is for us. So you feel like, oh, I could let this person kind of back in, and I can talk to them. We can do this. And so you do. Maybe you actually end no contact. Maybe you sort of loosen up on that gray rock and make it more multicolored rock, and You open up that emotional part of yourself. Here's the tricky bit. There's a couple. Number one, the narcissist is a little bit like kryptonite. You're now in this sort of new state of being sort of Superman or Superwoman. But that narcissist, and in many ways it's due to something probably that we call classical conditioning, two things being paired up. When you're in the face of that narcissistic person again, although you're empowered in all other areas of your life, you may actually feel somewhat paralyzed again. You may feel like you're cowering, and just the association. Remember, the only thing that holds memory better than this thing is this thing. Our bodies often hold these memories. And just being in the presence of that individual again can really trigger a lot of feelings in you. And you then may start doubting yourself and you're healing again, even though you are clearly healed. So some people will really report experiencing a setback when they're in front again from the when they're in front of the narcissist again, that they had to do all that healing from. The other thing that actually sometimes happens, and people are struck, they're so angry at themselves for falling for it, is that they do fall for they fall for it again. They believe the narcissist stuff, and not because they're tricked, but because now that you're healed, you feel like, I got this figured out. And before you know it, you're getting pulled into the gaslighting and the manipulation and the confusion and all of it. And then what happens is it'll often lead you to devalue yourself and feel stupid or foolish, which you're not. You're human. There's a reason this person was able to do a number on you once before, that they probably are still able to do a number on other people, and that they'd be able to do it again. And because of the shared history you have with this person, there is that vulnerability that's always present. A lot of people will say to me, as I was healing from the narcissistic person, I almost felt like I got cocky, putting myself back in there with them and thinking, I can do this. And then I left the whole interaction with that narcissistic person feeling worse than before. I kind of felt awful, and I hated that feeling, as though all my healing was for nothing. The thing that I want to reassure you is your healing wasn't for nothing. You have healed. But being in the presence of someone toxic, being in a toxic space, being in something that's not healthy, is never going to feel good. If anything, this time you may actually feel how unhealthy it is right from the beginning. But because you're healed, you may think, well, I should be able to overpower this. I should be able to deal with this. Not necessarily. Even the first time around, especially if it was someone you chose, or a relationship like that happened when you were an adult, you should have been able to feel like you could walk away, but you didn't then, because you're vulnerable, because they are charming. There is a lot to fall for there. If it's a family of origin issue, obviously it's a bit more complicated. You were a child when you met your parent, and as you went through adulthood, it took all the effort in the world to set that boundary, and yet when you're in front of them again, no matter how healed you are, you sort of fall for it. But the fact is that you healing is in fact you healing. And it's really about being judicious about whether you want to be in the presence of this again. In some cases you might say, I don't have a choice, Dr. Ramani. The fact is, this is a divorce, we're trying to co-parent, it's very complicated, I've done my healing, I still have to talk to this person. But then what I say is, you still have to keep it a little clenched. Don't fully exhale. Don't think it's going to go back to like, hey, I've got this figured out, now they can't play me again. Just the negative emotional states that may start to overtake you may destabilize you and leave you feeling that maybe I didn't heal at all, which could set back your entire process of growth. The other thing that gets interesting is we can't count the narcissist out of this. Do you really think that they're happy that you've healed? I'm going to give you the answer. The answer is no. They're not happy you healed. You grew out of them. They experienced that as a betrayal and an abandonment. How dare you? How dare you think you can go through life without me? I'm your mother. I'm your partner. I'm your friend. I'm the one who's responsible for all your greatness. So they are not going to want you to heal. And if you actually have the audacity to heal, I can promise you they're not going to be happy about that. So when they sense you healing, trust me, They're going to try to draw you back into the mud. In the early phases of your healing, you would have had boundaries and no contact, and you would have likely had, hopefully, I hope, you would have hopefully had a cheering squad around you saying, don't go back in, stay no contact, do gray rock, keep those boundaries. You did that, and you fought the fight, and you healed. The narcissist isn't going to go quietly into the night. They are still going to say, oh, you think you healed? And they're almost going to view it as gamesmanship, because there's one thing a narcissist can't stand, and they can't stand the idea that they didn't win. And so they're going to need to win. And winning may even be little things like getting to you, saying just that one thing that only they know will get you. It could be a parent that knows the one way they can stick it to you. It could be an ex-partner who knows exactly what to say to leave you feeling unsettled. If this happens to you, you feel like you've healed from your narcissistic relationship, and you're faced with them again, and you feel destabilized, I can only beseech you, don't think that you've lost ground on your healing. You have healed. That this was never a healthy relationship. This was always unhealthy. And as a result, you feeling uncomfortable being in their presence again doesn't mean you haven't healed. It means you're wise. It means your mind and your body are getting it. And it becomes an alarm signal to say, I need to step away because I don't want to put myself in harm's way. You've learned to advocate for yourself. Healing, like any process, leaves us in some ways a little bit vulnerable. Think about a bone you might have broken in two places. That bone may heal beautifully, but that tiny little crack and vulnerability may always be there. And that's what I let people know. People say, will I ever heal 100%? To me, the ultimate goal of healing in a narcissistic relationship, frankly, is to get to a place of relative indifference. The indifference means that you're not as affected. Good, bad, it doesn't really matter. You just feel like, I don't care what happens to them. I really don't. You know it's bad karma to wish ill will on someone. It's like, I don't wish bad on them. I don't wish good on them. I just don't wish on them. And in the ultimate nirvana, as it were, is that you just don't think about them anymore. I have worked with people who healed, who got to the place of indifference, and then 20 years later ran into that narcissist. And it was fine, but they'll say to me, Doc, you know what? After all those years, I still felt that discomfort. I still felt that tensing. And I heard that tiny, tiny echo of you may not be enough. But this time, like, I could barely hear it. But I didn't like the feeling. And in many cases, when they were lucky, they saw their former narcissist before their narcissist saw them, and they were able to turn around and get out of there. To me, that honestly is healing. A lot of people say, I should be able to face them. Maybe, and in some cases you may not have a choice. But the fact of the matter is your healing is a beautiful, beautiful process. It's something you should hold on to. Feeling like you had a setback because you were in the presence of a narcissist doesn't mean you haven't healed. It means you have, and that you need to listen to yourself and remind yourself that you never should spend more time with someone who's not good for you than you need to. Thanks again. Keep working towards that healing. That's the important goal. But don't let that moment of healing lead you to put your guard down so that that narcissist can impede your healing, which they may very well want to manipulate your process of healing, or that you don't find yourself judging yourself and engaging in that negative self-talk again. I know you can do it. Thanks again. If you are new to this channel, please hit the bell, subscribe, always get those notifications. We have new videos coming out twice a week. Thanks.